when I experienced being kidnapped and raped.
After going through all that,
I always knew I wanted to be an entertainer, and it's very challenging when
and you have this dream to do what?
To own my own clothing boutique. And
Welcome. Thank you. Today we have an awesome show for you. Many of us hear about trauma constantly. We constantly hear about what happens when people come from overseas that are in the military, what happens to police officers. Today I have a trauma specialist. So stay tuned. We're going to find out what happens, what trauma is, and how to overcome when terrible things happen to you. So we're going to bring out Christina. Christina, come on out. Christina, how are you doing?
good, how are you?
We need to talk. Have a seat. First of all, can you tell people, what do you do? Tell them some of your credentials and exactly what it is that you do.
Well, I'm a trauma therapist. I work with people who have chronic PTSD and some people with just PTSD with big trauma issues. And so I run a private practice in Columbus, Ohio, and I study a lot and learn a lot, and there's a reason why I do that, because I was born to my father, who was a Vietnam veteran, so he had PTSD, and we didn't know a lot about PTSD back then. So life was a little bit of a struggle with a father that had PTSD.
So this is the most important part, doing marriage and family therapy, and people don't understand that many of the issues that they have and the fears that they have come from their childhood. So
Absolutely.
Can you please share with us what happened to you in your childhood?
Well, besides my father going on rages and having symptoms of PTSD constantly, when I was 8 to 10, I was raped and trafficked by a family friend / neighbor who took care of my brother and I after school. So pretty much raped every day from 8 to 10. And then when I was about 12, I was also raped by another family member of mine. And the entire family decided to choose that person and believe that person over me, so I lost my entire family too as well.
One of the most important things I've learned doing this work is people will suffer these type of traumas and think that they are okay. They might go to a family or friend and no one says anything when they try to tell or reach out for help, and then over time they will bury this and think that they're okay, but they're not. What happens to us when we bury these type of issues that have happened to us? What are some of the symptoms of trauma in our life?
Oh, problems sleeping, decreased appetite, a lot of panic attacks, anxiety attacks. I teach a lot of my clients, I've been studying a lot of neuropsychology and really understanding what happens between our brain and our bodies. And growing up with all of the trauma that I had, I always felt broken, disorganized, lost, alone. And so all of my people, these are the people that my clients that I work with, they're just like me. And so I teach them what's going on in their body and their mind and help them gain control of their life. Most of the time when I grew up, I believed that I was crazy when I'd have anxiety or panic attacks. They would just hit for no reason. And sometimes when you have a trauma, there could be, I use an example that if I'm on the bus and I see someone's shoes, I may not equate that with my abuser, but there's a piece of my brain that has that singed into it, and I can be sitting on a bus and look down and look at shoes and be thrown into like a panic attack or an anxiety attack, which now I call emotional flashbacks. Yes, and so I teach them how to manage those flashbacks.
So people don't understand that, let's say something happened to them at 2 a.m. in the morning when they were little and someone came into the room, and they don't understand why today at 2 a.m. in the morning they can't sleep at night. And they will look over some of these things and not realize it's because something happened to them. You are the same age emotionally as when you were traumatized. Imagine that. You are the same age emotionally as when you were traumatized. So if you were traumatized at 6 or 7, when you get emotional, you will turn into that 7 or 6-year-old. And sometimes we don't realize it's because something happened to us that arrest us emotionally and arrest our development. So I also want to know, what did you have to overcome in order to get into this work and become a clinician and start to work with people? What are some of the things that you had to overcome?
Well, I think I had to overcome panic attacks for sure to get through school and to get through graduate school. I worked in community agencies for 16 years, and then you'll meet my husband later, and
Yes.
he is kind of what drove me to kind of turn towards trauma, along with my father. I was always on this, I've always been on this quest to try and figure out how to help him, how to improve our relationship, and then with my trauma as well, always trying to find this magic bullet, this thing that really helps me live. And through research and studying and then meeting you, of course, I've learned so many techniques that really help people gain control over their lives.
So yeah, let's talk about that. What are you up to now?
So now, besides my private practice, which is booked, and what's funny, one of my fears was worrying if I would have enough clients, except for my problem now is that I have too many. And it's kind of funny now to look at it, but when my husband and I are working on something called the Trauma Masterminds, where we're pulling together therapists and we're teaching them some of these techniques that every therapist really should know. And I went to counseling from 14 to 38, and not one of those therapists changed my life and helped me make transformations. And so I'm passionate about teaching as many therapists as I can these things that I have learned to be able to gain control of my life again. And I was never living. My trauma people, we don't live, we just survive. And so I teach them how to live finally, because all we've ever done our whole entire lives is survive.
So I had the opportunity of meeting you at a Harvard Symposium mastermind,
Yes.
and I was able to share with you some of the work I'm doing with trauma.
Yes.
And so you've been an awesome blessing, because I knew that if it had an impact on you, who's a specialist and understood it, you could
Yes.
actually tell me if it worked and how it worked. Can you please talk about what happened when we did some of that process?
It's going to make me cry, seriously. Besides this quest of learning and trying to help pull people out of trauma, I believed that I had put together a lot of interventions that really were helpful and worked. And you brought me this fear interview. And I will tell you, my whole entire life and all of my trauma people's lives, fear grips us by the throat. I even told my husband after the fear interview that I felt like I could finally breathe, that I could kind of spread my wings and do whatever I wanted to do. Since the fear interview with you, I stopped biting my nails, and not even trying not to bite my nails. I just stopped. No fear, no anxiety, and every time fear comes into my life, I now know from what you taught me how to get rid of it. And I've turned and worked with your intervention with some of my biggest trauma people, and you should see the transformations, some in less than 30 minutes, that you can really see them. Because a lot of my clients are very tight, they armor when they're traumatized, and so you can just see the big difference. And all of them that I have done this on, they're doing amazing. They're living finally. And so your piece was kind of the last piece of I guess my journey of trying to put all this stuff together, because it's transforming lives. It's amazing. It's a gift from God.
God has not given us the spirit of fear. Wow. But power, love, and a sound mind. Christina, you blessed me because I've been doing this work for quite some time, and I didn't realize that honestly I needed to meet professionals at the highest level. I was over everyone's head and I didn't know it. And then I got to Harvard and I met what I call the mutants, people that are extraordinary people at the highest level, what they do.
Right.
I begin to talk to them and they begin to say, Nathan, do you know what you have here? Do you know what you're doing? And so you have been a major confirmation for this work. And we're partnering together doing a trauma symposium to help teach clinicians. So now we're going to partner to teach the clinicians how to do this, because many of them are dealing with trauma themselves, and this work is really helping them. So the next piece I want to actually introduce is her husband, amazing guy that she began to talk to me about and I was able to meet. So I want to bring him up. If you can give him a hand clap. I want you guys to meet Albert. Albert, come on up here, man. Okay, Albert. I had to bring Albert up here because we deal with violence and police officers, and we deal also with what's going on in the community, a cultural conflict too. Many times what we deal with is where we have police officers and there's some altercation, and especially if it's a minority, that there's some type of trauma or violence. And so we talk about that, and I don't think we do enough work with that. And then the other thing we miss sometimes is the police officers, the trauma that they go through. So what's awesome about this is Albert is a guy that grew up in a single home with a mother and always wanted to help families and protect them. And he was, I don't know the young man's name, there's a police officer, he's all over Instagram and social media, that he's always with kids and having a great time. I love that guy. Well, Albert's one of those guys. But what happened was Albert got into a situation, and I really want him to talk about that because I want to talk about what happens when officers are traumatized. Albert, can you tell us what happened to you as you were on the job and had this altercation? Tell us about that.
December 14th, 1996, I got a call to a bank robbery. I was first officer to arrive at the scene, and the guy immediately showed up at the back door with a pregnant hostage, threatening to kill her baby. He had the gun in her stomach. She was like 7 months pregnant. He said he's gonna kill her baby if I didn't put my gun down and let him leave. He started approaching me. He got into a getaway car, and from training in the past, just from a story, an officer told me one time where he stopped some bank robbers, and when the guy put in gear, he seen the gun in the hand, and he knew that this was, and they come out and they started shooting at the car. And when I was at my bank robbery, when that guy put that car into gear, my gun just went off 5 times through the back window. And so I killed a young man in the line of duty.
Man, I want you, Albert, to kind of talk about, after that happened, what began to happen to you and the trauma that began to set into your life.
Well, this was 1996, this was before 9/11, and I don't think PTSD was looked at too seriously, just like the Vietnam vets went through. But I was sent to see a doctor one day, and I was back on the road in 3 days after the shooting. And then a few months later, I was tested again with a guy that wanted to die by the hand of a cop. We'd evacuated a whole neighborhood. This guy the wife escaped the house, the kids were inside, he's walking in and out of the house with a .357, and all the officers there, I was the last guy to get there, but nobody confronted him. I'm working my way up using cover. I get to a point where I'm at the entrance to the house where he comes out, and I confront this man. I step out on him, and I tell him, don't move, we're gonna take you into custody, this is gonna end right now. And he tested me. He wanted me to shoot him, and I didn't. He could have killed me, and I think I realized that day, I didn't know that I had realized that day until I met my wife, and she did her magic with me. Yeah, but I went on a downward spiral and I started getting in trouble at work. I was always getting progressively disciplined for being late or maybe not shaving or, just instead of sending me to see anybody to find out what was wrong with me, December 14th I shot the guy, and 4 years later, December 14th, I was being recommended for termination.
So let me explain this. When the guy comes out and he does like this, and Albert doesn't shoot him because Albert has already been traumatized from shooting another man, Albert doesn't want to kill anybody, but that puts the other officers in danger. And so to them now, because Albert did not shoot this guy, Albert is dangerous to them. So he felt as if maybe he was being discriminated against, and really what it was is the officers now feel that Albert, because he doesn't want to kill anybody, now they are not safe. So they don't necessarily feel safe with him. You begin to feel kind of this discrimination, and over time, pretty much you kind of went through like a discharge, I believe. What was the process that you kind of went through to exit the force?
Well, I was getting rode up again and again and again and again, and this day I just kind of, I called the police on myself. I left the station, went to my house, and I called the police, and I made them come over and take my gun from me because I wasn't feeling like I was in the right place. So they sent me to a psychiatrist, and I never returned to work. The disability board approved me for a disability. I moved out in the country for 10 years and was on the verge of probably suicide. I was at the very bottom. I met my wife.
So, hand clap. This is a beautiful story. Here you have a trauma specialist, right? And then you have a man going through trauma. But when I met, well, really, when I met Christina, all she talked about was, you got to meet Albert, you got to meet Albert. And so now together, we are coming together to do these trauma symposiums and help people understand what trauma is and help the clinicians understand it. And so when is the symposium?
April 2nd through the 8th. Yes.
Through the 8th. Where can they go to find out about this?
You can go to www.thetraumamasterminds.org.
And also, where can they go to find your practice?
My practice is www.columbusohiotherapy.com.
Okay. She's an expert. I met her at Harvard. That means that we are geniuses now. Anytime Harvard invites you, y'all can give a hand clap for that. Well, as you can tell, when people open up with one another and share, part of the fear is opening up and being honest. And so as we begin to talk to each other and share our stories, one of my favorite texts from the greatest master of spiritual direction, he said that we overcome him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. Some of us think that we can overcome things just by saying, God, Jesus, Jesus, God. Well, what did he do for you? Tell us your story. Never be afraid to tell your story, because it is the most powerful thing in the universe. So I just want you guys to give a hand clap, and thank you guys.